Olivia Keller had been missing for 8 years, at least according to her FBI personnel file. The official report listed her as a MIA following a high-stakes undercover operation in Berlin, presumed dead after a warehouse explosion that left no recoverable remains. But ghosts don't run boutique security firms in quiet Colorado mountain towns, and they certainly don't leave digital fingerprints on classified databases. Every third Tuesday at exactly 2:17 a.m., before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. At 41, Olivia looked nothing like the decorated special agent who'd once infiltrated international crime syndicates. With ease, her once auburn hair now silver at the temples, her hands bearing small scars from years of practical work rather than the manicured precision required for undercover operations. The locals in Silverton knew her as Morgan Reed, the reclusive security consultant who rarely spoke about her past but could design unbreachable systems for local businesses and preferred cash transactions to digital payments. What they didn't know was that Olivia Keller had once been called by a different name entirely. In classified briefings, whispered among intelligence officers who'd never officially acknowledged her existence, she was known as Artemis, the agency's most effective deep cover operative, until she allegedly died executing Operation Blackstone. The morning everything changed started like any other. Olivia was completing her morning security routine, checking the sophisticated alarm system that surrounded her modest cabin nestled among pine trees. Her surveillance equipment picked up a delivery truck approaching, unusual, as she rarely received packages and never without prior arrangement. Old habits from her former life kept her cautious. New threats in her current one kept her vigilant. The courier seemed legitimate enough, but the package bore markings Olivia recognized immediately. A specific arrangement of seemingly random postal stamps that comprised a code used only by one person, Director Samuel Foster, her former handler, and the man who had recruited her to the FBI's elite undercover division 15 years ago. The same man who, according to all available intelligence, had died in a private plane crash 4 months earlier. Olivia's hands remained steady as she signed for the package, though her mind raced through possibilities. Director Foster had been her mentor, the architect of her most dangerous operations, and ultimately, the man who helped her disappear after Berlin when everything went catastrophically wrong. If he had arranged for this delivery, either he wasn't actually dead, or he had set this in motion before his death, neither scenario bringing comfort. Inside her cabin, after thorough scanning for electronic surveillance or explosive components, Olivia carefully opened the package. It contained only a simple USB drive and a handwritten note. The silence has been breached. Chimera protocol activated. They found the footage live. Her stomach tightened at the implications. Chimera protocol was the emergency contingency they had established years ago, to be activated only if Olivia's carefully constructed disappearance had been compromised. The mention of footage could only refer to one thing: the security recordings from the Berlin operation, the ones that were supposed to have been destroyed, the ones that would prove she hadn't died in that explosion. Olivia plugged the drive into an air-gapped computer she maintained specifically for high-risk communications. The contents were heavily encrypted, but the decryption key was something only she and Foster would know: the coordinates of the safe house where she'd spent her first night as a field agent, combined with the case number of her first successful operation. The files revealed what she had feared. Facial recognition software scanning through recently digitized archives had flagged a match from security footage taken outside the Berlin warehouse moments before the explosion. The timestamp showed her leaving the building 7 minutes before detonation, contradicting the official report that claimed she had been inside when the charges went off. More disturbing was the evidence that someone had been systematically searching for her. Database queries, Information requests through back channels, facial recognition sweeps, through transportation hubs near Silverton. Someone with high-level clearance was looking for Artemis, and they were getting closer. The final file was a video message from Foster himself, recorded shortly before his death. His face looked older than she remembered, creased with new lines of worry. "Olivia, if you're watching this, then my suspicions were correct. The Berlin footage has been discovered by Director Marshall's new digital archiving initiative. He doesn't know what he's found yet, but when he does, everything we worked for will be at risk. The Chimera operation wasn't just about getting you out. It was about protecting what you discovered about Project Helix." Olivia's breath caught. Project Helix, the classified domestic surveillance program she had accidentally uncovered during the Berlin operation. A program that violated federal law, constitutional protections, and international treaties. A program that certain powerful figures would kill to keep secret. "I've arranged secure transport to Washington," Foster continued. "The evidence you secured 8 years ago must now come to light. Marshall is a good man, one of the few we can trust. But he needs the complete picture, and only you have it. The access codes and contact protocols are included on this drive. You have 72 hours before your current identity is compromised." The video ended, leaving Olivia staring at her reflection in the darkened screen. 8 years of careful anonymity, of rebuilding a life away from the shadows and secrets that had defined her career, now shattered by the discovery of security footage that proved she had never died in Berlin. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. She moved quickly, activating contingency plans developed years ago but never expected to use. A hidden compartment beneath her cabin floor contained everything she needed: emergency funds, alternate identification documents, weapons that couldn't be traced. Most importantly, it contained the encrypted evidence about Project Helix that she had smuggled out of Berlin before staging her death. Evidence that implicated 3 senators, 2 federal judges, and a network of private contractors in a domestic spying operation of unprecedented scale. As she worked, Olivia considered her options. Running was the obvious choice. She had identities prepared that could take her to countries without extradition treaties, funds that couldn't be traced. She could disappear again, become someone new, leave Project Helix buried forever. But something in Foster's message had resonated. For 8 years, she had lived with the knowledge that American citizens were being illegally surveilled by their own government, that constitutional rights were being systematically violated under the guise of national security. She had chosen silence then, believing that exposing the truth would cause more damage than keeping it hidden. Now, with Foster dead and her cover potentially blown, perhaps silence was no longer the right choice. Perhaps it was time for Artemis to complete her final mission. The preparations took 3 hours. Olivia transferred funds through a series of anonymous accounts, activated a secure communication channel to the contact Foster had provided, and loaded essential equipment into the modified 4-wheel drive vehicle she kept for emergencies. Her cabin's security systems were reprogrammed to transmit false occupancy data for the next week, buying her time before anyone local realized Morgan Reed had disappeared. By dusk, she was driving east through mountain passes, following back roads that avoided major surveillance networks. The secure phone Foster had arranged buzzed with confirmation that her contact was in place, a former Justice Department official named Rebecca Lawson, who now worked as special counsel to Director Marshall. "I'll meet you at the designated location," the message read. "Bring everything you have on Project Helix. Director Marshall has questions about Berlin." Olivia studied the message carefully, looking for any signs of coercion or deception. Finding none, she allowed herself a moment of cautious hope. If Marshall truly was investigating Project Helix independently, Her evidence might finally reach someone with both the authority and integrity to act on it. The mountain roads were treacherous in the gathering darkness, but Olivia navigated them with the precision that had once made her the agency's most effective field operative. Her mind, however, was 8 years in the past, remembering the Berlin operation that had changed everything. She had been deep undercover, infiltrating an international arms dealers organization to track weapons being sold to terrorist cells. The operation had been sanctioned at the highest levels, with clear objectives and extraction protocols. What hadn't been anticipated was the discovery of American surveillance technology among the weapons, technology that was officially restricted from export and supposedly secure from theft. Following this unexpected lead, Olivia had uncovered something far more disturbing than arms trafficking. The surveillance systems weren't stolen. They were being deliberately provided to foreign entities as part of a broader initiative called Project Helix. American-made surveillance technology deployed abroad would collect data on foreign communications, which would then be shared with domestic agencies without the warrant requirements normally imposed on surveillance of American citizens. It was a deliberate end run around constitutional protections, laundering domestic surveillance through foreign partners. Worse, the private contractors managing the program were using the collected data for purposes far beyond counterterrorism, monitoring political activists, journalists, and even judges who might rule against government surveillance powers. Olivia had gathered the evidence, preparing to bring it through official channels, when she realized the operation had been compromised. Someone within the agency had learned what she'd discovered and was moving to silence her. That's when Foster had proposed the Chimera Protocol: fake her death, protect the evidence, and wait for a time when the truth could safely emerge. For 8 years, that time had never come. The officials implicated in Project Helix had only grown more powerful, the surveillance apparatus more entrenched. Foster had maintained his position, watching and waiting for an opportunity that seemed increasingly unlikely to arrive. Now driving through the Colorado night with 8-year-old evidence and a dead man's instructions, Olivia wondered if she was heading toward justice or a trap carefully laid by the very people she sought to expose. The first sign of trouble came at a remote gas station near the Colorado-Kansas border. Olivia spotted the surveillance camera, adjusting to track her vehicle specifically, its movement too precise to be automated. Someone was actively monitoring, which meant her anonymity was already compromised. She abandoned her vehicle at the next rest stop, transferring essential equipment to a different car acquired through means that wouldn't be traced to either Olivia Keller or Morgan Reed. The delay cost her valuable time. But moving forward in a compromised vehicle would have been suicide. The secure phone buzzed again at midnight. Route compromised. Surveillance activated on major highways. Proceed to secondary location. The change in plans was concerning, but not unexpected. If the people behind Project Helix had indeed identified her, they would be mobilizing every resource to intercept her before she reached Washington. The secondary location was a private airfield in Nebraska, where Foster had apparently arranged for transportation that would bypass conventional travel networks. Olivia drove through the night, taking back roads and changing vehicles twice more, before reaching the airfield shortly before dawn. A small twin-engine plane waited on the tarmac, its pilot performing pre-flight checks with methodical precision. "You must be the package," the pilot said, without looking up as Olivia approached. Her hand instinctively moved toward the concealed weapon at her waist. "Relax," the pilot continued, finally turning to face her. "Samuel briefed me before he died. I'm Colonel Larva Reeves, Air Force Intelligence. I flew extraction missions for your unit in Croatia back in 2014. Olivia studied the woman carefully. Colonel Reeves matched Foster's description of their contact, and her knowledge of the Croatia operations, which remained highly classified, provided additional verification. "What's our flight plan?" Olivia asked, still maintaining operational caution. "We're not filing one," Reeves replied. "This aircraft has been modified to reduce radar signature and carries identification codes that will register it as a weather research flight. We'll fly low, avoiding major air traffic corridors. It's not invisible, but it should keep us under the radar long enough to reach our destination." As they prepared for takeoff, Olivia secured her evidence in a specialized container designed to withstand extreme conditions. The original documentation from Berlin, the encrypted files Foster had sent, and her own detailed records of how Project Helix operated. Together, they represented the most comprehensive evidence ever assembled about the illegal surveillance program. "Foster said you disappeared for good reason," Reeves commented as the plane climbed into the early morning sky. "Said you found something that made powerful people nervous." "More than nervous," Olivia replied, watching the landscape below for any signs of pursuit. Project Helix violated every principle of constitutional governance. It turned surveillance tools meant for foreign threats against American citizens, created secret databases of personal information without warrants or oversight, and built a private power structure outside democratic control. "And they tried to kill you to keep it quiet. They thought they had killed me. The explosion in Berlin was supposed to eliminate both me and the evidence I'd gathered. Foster helped me stage my exit and establish a new identity before the dust had settled. But now there's footage showing you survived," Reeves observed. "Security camera from a building across the street. It was supposed to have been destroyed in the explosion, but apparently the footage was backed up to a server that was recently discovered during a digital archiving project." The plane continued eastward, flying low over the agricultural heartland of America. Olivia monitored communications channels using specialized equipment, alert for any signs that their flight had been detected by hostile forces. So far, they seemed to be maintaining operational security, but experience had taught her that appearances could be deceptive. "We'll land at a private facility outside Baltimore," Reeves explained. "From there, you'll be transported to meet Director Marshall under secure conditions. Foster arranged everything before his accident. Do you believe it was an accident?" Olivia asked, voicing the doubt that had been growing since receiving Foster's package. Reeves' expression tightened. The official report cited mechanical failure. The NTSB investigation found nothing suspicious. "That doesn't answer my question." "No," Reeves admitted after a moment. "I don't believe it was an accident. Samuel was too careful, too experienced. And the timing, just as this digital archiving project was discovering old files, seems convenient." The implication hung in the air between them. If Foster had been eliminated because someone feared what might be discovered in those archives, then the same people would be moving against Olivia with even greater determination. 4 hours into their flight, the first warning came through their secure communications channel. "Unidentified aircraft, you have entered restricted airspace. Identify yourself immediately and alter course as directed." Reeves exchanged a look with Olivia. "That's not standard FAA communication." "No," Olivia agreed, "it's not." The phrasing and frequency indicated a military intercept, but they weren't near any known restricted zones. Someone had identified their flight and was attempting to force them down using official channels. Reeves activated the plane's specialized communication system. "This is Weather Reconnaissance Flight Delta 79er conducting authorized atmospheric research. Our flight plan and authorization codes are being transmitted now." The false identification and authorization codes Foster had provided should have been sufficient to avoid most conventional scrutiny. But after a brief silence, the radio crackled again. "Delta 79er, your authorization has been flagged for verification. Maintain current heading and prepare for escort to nearest military airfield." "They're trying to divert us," Olivia said quietly. "Classic interdiction tactic." Reeves nodded, already adjusting their course and dropping to an even lower altitude. "Hold on, this might get uncomfortable." The twin-engine plane dipped suddenly, flying dangerously close to the terrain below. Reeves' skilled hands guided the aircraft through a series of maneuvers designed to use the landscape to mask their radar signature and confuse pursuit. "Two aircraft approaching from the northwest," Olivia reported, watching the specialized detection equipment. "Military jets, moving fast. We can't outrun them," Reeves stated flatly. "But we might be able to disappear." The colonel guided their plane toward a series of ridgelines, using the terrain to block direct line of sight with their pursuers. It was dangerous flying, requiring split-second adjustments and absolute precision, but Reeves handled the controls with the confidence of someone who had flown similar missions under much worse conditions. "There's a private airfield 30 miles ahead," she explained. Foster established it as an emergency landing site for exactly this scenario. "If we can reach it before those jets get a visual lock on us, we might be able to land and disappear before they realize where we've gone." The next 15 minutes were among the most tense of Olivia's operational career. Reeves pushed the aircraft to its limits, flying through valleys and around hills in a pattern designed to confuse tracking systems. Twice they heard radio calls from their pursuers, revealing growing frustration as the military jets struggled to maintain contact with their elusive target. The private airfield appeared ahead, little more than a cleared strip of land with minimal facilities, exactly the kind of unobtrusive location Foster would have selected. Reeves brought the plane down in a landing that prioritized speed over comfort, the wheels touching down hard as they came to a rapid stop near a camouflaged hangar. "Move quickly," Reeves ordered as they exited the aircraft. "Ground transportation is in the hangar. We have maybe 10 minutes before they expand their search pattern to include this area." Inside the hangar, they found a nondescript SUV with tinted windows and modified engine components. The vehicle was fueled and ready, with additional equipment stored in the rear compartment: communications gear, weapons, and surveillance countermeasures. "Foster thought of everything," Olivia observed as they transferred their essential equipment to the SUV. "He had 8 years to plan for this contingency," Reeves replied. He knew that if the Berlin footage ever surfaced, the response would be immediate and overwhelming. Every resource at their disposal would be activated to prevent you from reaching Washington with that evidence. As if to emphasize her point, they heard the distant sound of jets circling, expanding their search pattern to include the surrounding area. Soon, ground forces would likely be deployed to check any potential landing sites within range of their last known position. "We need to move," Olivia said, securing the evidence container in the SUV's hidden compartment. "How far to the meeting?" "Point with Director Marshall." "About 3 hours under normal conditions," Reeves replied. "But we'll need to avoid major roads and surveillance networks. Figure 5 hours, minimum." As they prepared to depart, Olivia's secure phone received an encrypted message: "Primary contact compromised. Marshall under surveillance. Proceed to failsafe location. Authorization: Chimera Actual." The designation, Chimera Actual, was significant. It was Foster's personal authentication code, one that couldn't have been compromised even if his systems had been breached after his death. This message had been pre-programmed, triggered by specific events Foster had anticipated. "The situation is deteriorating," Olivia told Reeves, showing her the message. "Marshall has been compromised, which means the official channels are no longer secure." Reeves processed this information with the calm efficiency of a veteran operative. The failsafe location would be the secure facility Foster maintained in West Virginia. Off the books, built with private resources, completely isolated from official networks. "Can we reach it without being intercepted?" "Not easily," Reeves admitted. "But Foster built redundancies into the system. There's a network of safe houses and alternate transportation methods we can use. It will take longer, but it should get us there. As they drove away from the airfield, following unmarked back roads that wound through rural landscapes, Olivia reviewed the evidence she carried. Project Helix represented the most comprehensive illegal surveillance operation ever conducted against American citizens, a system that made previous controversies about government monitoring look trivial by comparison. Unlike earlier programs that had at least maintained the pretense of targeting foreign threats, Project Helix had been explicitly designed to gather intelligence on domestic political movements, judicial officials, journalists, and even elected representatives who might oppose expanded surveillance powers. It provided its architects with blackmail material, political leverage, and the ability to neutralize opposition before it could effectively organize. The implication of Foster's final messages was clear. Project Helix hadn't been shut down after Olivia's disappearance. It had merely gone deeper underground, its capabilities expanded, its political protection strengthened. What had been a prototype operation 8 years ago was now likely a fully operational system with tendrils throughout American society. And somewhere in Washington, the people who controlled that system now knew that Artemis hadn't died in Berlin, after all, and that she was coming with evidence that could destroy everything they had built. Their journey across the eastern United States became a masterclass in evasion techniques. Olivia's years in deep cover had honed her ability to move undetected, while Reeves' military experience provided crucial knowledge of official search protocols. They abandoned the SUV after 3 hours, switching to a series of vehicles prepositioned by Foster's foresight. Each transition required careful timing and execution to avoid the expanding dragnet they could sense closing around them. They've activated every surveillance system in the mid-Atlantic region, Olivia noted as they monitored emergency frequencies and law enforcement communications. The pattern was clear: unusual coordination between local police, federal agencies, and private security firms, all focused on finding a woman matching Olivia's description. This goes beyond standard interdiction protocols, Reeves observed. This is a full counterintelligence operation with domestic resources. They're burning through operational security measures like they don't care who notices. Because they don't, Olivia replied grimly. If Project Helix is fully operational, they control the oversight mechanisms that would normally flag this kind of domestic activity. There's no one watching the watchers. By nightfall, they had reached the Pennsylvania border, moving on secondary roads and switching vehicles twice more. The roadblocks were becoming more frequent, and facial recognition systems had been activated at transportation hubs across 3 states. A secure message confirmed what they already suspected. Their flight plan had been traced to the emergency airfield, and teams were working outward from that location. We need to split up, Olivia decided as they paused at a remote service station. They're looking for 2 people traveling together. You head south as a diversion. I'll continue to the failsafe location. Reeves looked skeptical. Foster's instructions were clear: keep you protected until delivery of the evidence. Foster also knew when plans needed adaptation, Olivia countered. This isn't my first extraction under pursuit. The evidence is what matters, not me. 2 targets are easier to track than 1. After a moment's consideration, Reeves nodded. There's a series of dead drops between here and the failsafe location. I'll leave confirmation signals if I make it through. She handed Olivia a specialized communication device. This connects directly to Foster's private network. If Marshall regains secure status, or if we identify another trustworthy recipient for the evidence, you'll receive notification. They separated 30 minutes later, Reeves heading southeast in a vehicle deliberately chosen to match initial descriptions of their transportation, while Olivia continued toward West Virginia, in a nondescript older model car that would attract minimal attention in rural areas. Alone for the first time since beginning this journey, Olivia allowed herself to process the emotional weight of emerging from 8 years of carefully maintained anonymity. Morgan Reed had built a life in Colorado, not a complete life, perhaps, but one with its own rhythms and small satisfactions. That identity was now compromised, those connections severed. If she survived this mission, yet another reinvention awaited. The fatigue of constant vigilance was settling into her bones, a familiar discomfort from her years in the field. She had been trained to function through exhaustion, to maintain operational awareness even as her body demanded rest. Those skills returned now, muscle memory from a life she had tried to leave behind. 3 hours into her solo journey, the first concrete sign of pursuit appeared. A police cruiser pulled onto the rural highway behind her, maintaining distance but clearly tracking her vehicle. No lights, no attempt to pull her over, just patient surveillance, waiting for reinforcements or a vulnerable moment. Olivia assessed her options with cool precision. The rural landscape offered limited escape routes, but also limited the resources her pursuers could bring to bear without attracting attention. A standard police traffic stop would quickly escalate if they realized who she was, creating exactly the kind of public incident Project Helix's architects would want to avoid. She turned onto a smaller road, then another, following a route that would take her through a small town where multiple exit paths would be available. The police cruiser maintained its distance, now joined by an unmarked sedan that matched the profile of federal law enforcement vehicles. They were being careful, coordinating a quiet apprehension away from witnesses. The small town appeared ahead, a few streets of modest homes, a central business district with angled parking along the main street. Olivia pulled into a space between a pickup truck and a delivery van, gathering her essential equipment and the evidence container into a nondescript backpack. The pursuing vehicle slowed, maintaining visual contact while calling in reinforcements. 8 years ago, Olivia might have responded with direct countermeasures, creating a distraction, perhaps something dramatic enough to disperse her pursuers. But Operation Blackstone had taught her the value of subtler approaches. Sometimes the best escape wasn't the most obvious. She entered a small diner, ordered coffee, and engaged the waitress in friendly conversation about local road conditions. When the waitress stepped away, Olivia slipped into the restroom, quickly changed her appearance with items from her pack, and exited through the back door into a service alley. By the time her pursuers realized she had left the diner, Olivia was 3 blocks away, walking unhurriedly toward the town's small bus station. The vehicle she'd abandoned would keep them occupied for precious minutes as they secured and searched, it finding nothing but carefully planted misdirection. The regional bus departed 15 minutes later, carrying Olivia away from the expanding search perimeter. From the window, she spotted additional law enforcement vehicles converging on the town, their coordination suggesting a command structure beyond standard police operations. Project Helix was fully activated against her. 2 hours and 3 transportation. Changes later, Olivia approached the coordinates for the first of Foster's dead drops, a 24-hour storage facility off the interstate. The security was minimal, relying on anonymity rather than physical barriers. The storage unit contained what she needed: fresh identification, additional funds, weapons, and communications equipment that couldn't be easily traced. As she sorted through the resources Foster had left, Olivia found a sealed envelope with her real name handwritten on the front. Inside was a letter dated just 3 weeks before Foster's death. Olivia, if you're reading this, then the contingency we hoped would never be necessary has been activated. The Berlin footage has surfaced, and with it, the questions we've spent 8 years avoiding. I've tried to prepare for every scenario, to create secure paths for you and the evidence, but I've come to realize that our opponents have advantages we can't fully counter. Project Helix has evolved beyond what you discovered in Berlin. What? began as illegal surveillance has expanded into active manipulation. They're not just watching anymore. They're shaping narratives, influencing decisions, and eliminating obstacles. The evidence you carry isn't just politically damaging. It threatens a power structure that now extends throughout our government and beyond. I've recently discovered that Project Helix has deployed capabilities we never anticipated. They're using predictive algorithms to identify potential whistleblowers before they even act, deploying resources to neutralize them through character assassination, financial pressure, or worse. They've refined their approach since Berlin. Fewer explosions, more accidents, and coincidences that don't trigger investigations. Marshall was my hope for an institutional solution, a leader with the authority and integrity to act on your evidence through official channels. If you're reading this letter rather than meeting with him, then those channels have been compromised. There is another option. The evidence must reach the public, not just officials who might be compromised. I've established contact with a journalist named Catherine Moore at the Washington Chronicle. Her work on government transparency has been remarkable, and more importantly, she has demonstrated the courage to publish despite pressure. She's expecting contact using the protocol enclosed with this letter. Be careful, Liv. These people have had 8 years to entrench themselves, to build systems of protection and deniability. They won't be easily exposed, even with concrete evidence. Remember what you told me in Zagreb when everything was falling apart around us. The truth matters. Sam, not because it always wins, it doesn't. It matters because without it, we're just powerful people telling convenient stories. You were right then. You're still right. Finish this mission, Agent Keller. Bring Artemis home one last time. The letter struck Olivia with unexpected emotional force. Foster's voice seemed to reach across time and beyond death, reminding her of the principles that had once defined her service. Before Berlin, before the disillusionment of discovering American agencies violating the very laws they were sworn to uphold, she had believed in the mission, in the idea that her work, however shadowed, ultimately protected something worth protecting. Catherine Moore. The name was familiar from investigative pieces that had exposed government overreach in surveillance programs. Her reporting had been thorough, balanced, and most importantly, effective in generating congressional response. If Foster had trusted her with knowledge of Project Helix, there must have been good reason. The journalist option represented a significant deviation from their original plan. Taking classified evidence to the press carried legal risks that approaching official channels didn't. But if those official channels were compromised by the very conspiracy she sought to expose, institutional whistleblowing would only warn the guilty and endanger the messenger. Olivia studied the contact protocol Foster had established. It was characteristically thorough. Secure communication methods, verification procedures, emergency contingencies. He had even included recent photographs of Moore to prevent impersonation, along with background information that could be used to verify her identity. The decision crystallized as Olivia considered Foster's final message. This wasn't just about exposing illegal surveillance anymore. Project Helix represented a fundamental threat to democratic governance, a system where unaccountable officials could monitor, manipulate, and control without oversight or constraint. The public deserved to know, even if the institutions meant to protect them had been compromised. She established contact using the secure channel Foster had arranged, sending a brief message with the authentication codes that would identify her to Moore as Foster's source. The response came within minutes, confirmation that the channel was active and monitored. Authentication confirmed. Security at current location compromised, relocating to alternate site. Will contact with secure meeting instructions within 6 hours. The journalist was already taking precautions, which suggested she understood the dangers involved in this communication. Foster had clearly briefed her on operational security protocols, another indication of how thoroughly he had prepared for this contingency. Olivia used the waiting period to review the evidence once more, organizing it for maximum impact and clarity. The original Berlin discoveries formed the foundation, documents revealing the initial authorization for Project Helix, signed by officials who publicly denied such programs existed. Financial records showed the flow of funds, through shell companies to private contractors who built the surveillance infrastructure. Technical specifications detailed capabilities far beyond what had been disclosed to congressional oversight committees. Most damning were the target lists, thousands of Americans selected for monitoring, not because of suspected criminal activity or terror connections, but because of political activities, journalistic work, legal challenges to government authority, or simply relationships with others under surveillance. The dragnet had expanded exponentially, creating a database of personal information that could be weaponized against any citizen who became inconvenient to those in power. Foster had supplemented the original evidence with updates tracked during his final months, new deployments of surveillance technology, additional officials brought into the conspiracy, expanded targeting parameters that now included judges, overseeing cases involving government surveillance authorities. The picture it painted was of a system growing more confident in its impunity, more aggressive in protecting itself from exposure. 6 hours later, the secure channel activated with coordinates for a meeting location, a 24-hour diner in a small West Virginia town, selected for its multiple access routes and minimal surveillance coverage. The message included timing instructions, designed to allow verification that neither party was being followed. Olivia approached the location with extreme caution, establishing observation points to monitor activity around the diner for any signs of surveillance or tactical teams positioning for apprehension. Nothing appeared unusual, regular customers coming and going, staff performing routine duties, no vehicles or individuals demonstrating surveillance behaviors. Inside, Catherine Moore sat alone in a corner booth, positioned to observe both the front entrance and the kitchen access. She matched Foster's photographs, mid-40s, professionally dressed but not conspicuously so, with an alertness in her expression that suggested awareness of her surroundings without obvious nervousness. Olivia entered according to protocol, ordered coffee at the counter, and observed Moore's reaction to the signal phrase spoken within her hearing. The journalist responded correctly, indicating she was operating freely rather than under duress. "You must be Artemis," Moore said quietly when Olivia joined her. "Samuel said you were exceptional." "I didn't realize that included returning from the dead." "Reports of my death were," Olivia paused, "administratively convenient for certain parties, and now extremely inconvenient for those same parties," Moore observed. "Samuel briefed me on Project Helix 3 months ago. He was concerned that something might happen to him and wanted insurance that the information wouldn't die with him." "Did he share why he believed he was in danger?" "He'd identified unusual access patterns in classified systems. Someone was reviewing old case files related to Berlin, particularly the details of your operation. At first, he thought it might be routine archiving, but the pattern suggested targeted interest in materials that should have been destroyed years ago." This aligned with Foster's messages to Olivia. Someone had been systematically examining the Berlin operation, perhaps looking for loose ends or vulnerabilities in the official narrative. "Did he suspect who was behind the searches?" Olivia asked. "He had theories," Moore replied. "The access originated from terminals with section chief authorization or higher. Only 8 people in the agency have that level of clearance, and Foster trusted only 2 of them. When his plane went down, he was on his way to meet with one of those 2. The implication was clear. Foster had been eliminated because he was getting close to identifying the source of the security breach. His death, carefully disguised as an accident, had been meant to protect Project Helix as the Berlin evidence resurfaced. "I have the complete files," Olivia said, keeping her voice low. Everything from Berlin, plus Foster's subsequent investigations, names, dates, authorization documents, target lists. Enough to expose the entire operation and everyone involved. Moore's expression remained professionally neutral, but her eyes reflected understanding of what this meant. This will be the most significant exposure of government overreach in a generation. The people implicated won't go down easily. They'll attack the evidence, the messenger, and anyone associated with publication. Foster believed you would. Publis, despite the risks. He was right, Moore confirmed without hesitation. But we need to be strategic. A direct publication of classified materials would allow them to focus on the illegality of the disclosure rather than the content. We need to build the story methodically, establish the pattern of abuse, and create public demand for accountability before they can construct their narrative. We don't have the luxury of time, Olivia countered. Once they realize I've made contact with a journalist, they'll escalate containment efforts. They might currently want me alive to locate the evidence, but that calculus changes the moment they believe publication is imminent. Moore nodded her understanding. I have secure facilities where we can work. Off-network systems, physical. Security, trusted colleagues who can help analyze and organize the material. The Chronicle has established protocols for handling classified disclosures that protect both the information and the sources. They discussed operational details, secure transportation to Moore's facility, communication protocols, contingency plans if either of them was compromised. The journalist demonstrated a surprisingly sophisticated understanding of operational security, another indication of Foster's thorough preparation. There's something you should know, Moore said as their planning concluded. 3 days ago, the agency announced a major counterintelligence operation targeting a hostile foreign operative attempting to compromise classified systems. The description matches you in several key details. They're laying groundwork to discredit whatever you reveal. This was a standard containment strategy. Reframe a whistleblower as a foreign agent, shifting public attention from the content of the disclosure to the patriotic imperative of protecting national security. It was effective precisely because it exploited legitimate concerns about foreign intelligence operations. Foster anticipated this, Olivia replied. The evidence includes documentation of my service record, mission authorizations signed by directors who publicly denied such operations existed, and internal communications acknowledging the true nature of what I discovered in Berlin. They can attempt to paint me as a foreign agent, but the evidence tells a different story. We'll need to move quickly, Moore concluded. My team is ready. Let's complete what Foster started. As they prepared to depart separately, following routes designed to detect surveillance, Olivia felt a sense of purpose she hadn't experienced since before Berlin. For 8 years, she had lived with the knowledge that American citizens were being illegally monitored by their government, their privacy violated, their data weaponized against them. She had chosen exile over exposure, believing the institutional damage would be too great. Now with Foster dead and Project Helix expanding its reach, that calculation had changed. Some institutions needed to be damaged if they had become tools of oppression rather than protection. Some secrets needed exposure if they enabled abuse rather than security. Artemis had one final mission, not for the government she had once served, but for the principles that government was meant to uphold. The truth about Project Helix would finally emerge, not whispered in classified briefings, but proclaimed in headlines that no amount of surveillance could suppress. Catherine Moore's secure facility proved to be a converted warehouse in the industrial district of Baltimore, its exterior deliberately unremarkable while its interior housed state-of-the-art security systems and communications equipment. A small team of trusted journalists and technical experts had transformed the space into a digital fortress where classified information could be analyzed without network vulnerability. We call it the Vault, Moore explained as she led Olivia through layers of physical and electronic security. Built after our last major government accountability story led to some unwelcome attention from intelligence agencies. Everything is air-gapped, electromagnetically shielded, and monitored for intrusion attempts. The main workspace contained multiple independent computer systems, specialized printing equipment, and a research library of previous government disclosures. The technical sophistication impressed even Olivia, who had worked with some of the most advanced operational security systems during her agency career. Foster helped design the security protocols, Moore added, noting Olivia's appreciative assessment. He believed journalists needed the same level of protection as intelligence operatives when handling sensitive information. Said democracy depended on it. The core team consisted of 5 people besides Moore, an investigative journalist specialized in national security issues, a former intelligence analyst who now worked for transparency organizations, a digital security expert who had previously helped whistleblowers protect their communications, a legal counsel with experience in First Amendment cases involving classified information, and a data journalist who could transform complex information into accessible visual formats. Everyone here has been vetted extensively, Moore assured Olivia. They understand the risks and have committed to absolute operational security until publication. As Olivia shared the evidence with Moore's team, the enormity of Project Helix's scope became clear even to these experienced professionals. The data analyst, a woman named Rachel, who had worked on previous surveillance exposes, visibly paled as she reviewed the target lists. This is comprehensive domestic surveillance disguised as foreign intelligence collection, she said, scrolling through databases containing names, personal information, and surveillance categories. They're monitoring federal judges, congressional staffers, constitutional law professors, civil liberties attorneys, anyone who might challenge authorities through legal or legislative channels. The former intelligence analyst, Marcus, examined the technical specifications with growing concern. These capabilities exceed anything publicly acknowledged. They've integrated commercial data brokers, telecommunications infrastructure, social media analysis, financial monitoring, and location tracking into a single system that can essentially create a complete profile of any target's life. Most disturbing were the operational files showing how Project Helix had moved beyond passive surveillance to active intervention. Targets who showed potential to threaten the program's secrecy found their professional reputations suddenly damaged by leaked personal information, their financial accounts flagged for suspicious activity, or their communications mysteriously disrupted at critical moments. They're not just watching, the national security journalist David observed grimly. They're shaping outcomes, neutralizing potential opposition before it materializes. As the team worked to organize and verify the evidence, Olivia noticed Moore engaged in an intense discussion with their legal counsel. Sarah, the journalist, motioned Olivia to join them. "We have a complication," Moore explained. "The agency has accelerated their narrative about you being a foreign operative. They've briefed key congressional leaders and selected media outlets, suggesting that national security has been compromised by a deep cover agent who faked her death to avoid detection." Sarah elaborated, "They're preparing legal groundwork for unprecedented action against any organization that publishes your evidence, characterizing it as aiding a hostile intelligence operation rather than protected journalistic activity." This wasn't surprising. It was exactly the kind of preemptive, counter-narrative Project Helix would deploy to neutralize a whistleblower. By framing Olivia as a foreign agent, they shifted the focus from their illegal surveillance to her alleged betrayal, invoking patriotic sentiment to override concerns about constitutional violations. "How does this affect our publication strategy?" Olivia asked. "We need to establish your credibility conclusively before presenting the evidence," Moore replied. "If the public sees you as a foreign spy, they'll be predisposed to dismiss the information regardless of its veracity." Sarah, the legal expert, added, "We also need to ensure the Chronicle has maximum legal protection. The First Amendment provides significant shelter for publishing classified information in the public interest, but that protection weakens if they can convince a judge the publisher knew the source was a foreign agent." This presented a new challenge. Olivia had spent 8 years hiding her identity, deliberately avoiding creating records that could connect Morgan Reed to Olivia Keller. Establishing her legitimate service history and American citizenship would require official documentation that had been sealed or redacted when she was declared dead. "Foster may have anticipated this," Olivia said, remembering details from his preparations. "The evidence includes authenticated copies of my original service records, mission authorizations, commendations, and citizenship documentation." He maintained a secure archive of my official identity after the Berlin operation. Moore looked thoughtful. "Those help, but they're still documents we're presenting, which they could claim are sophisticated forgeries. We need independent verification from sources the public would trust." The solution emerged from an unexpected direction. Marcus, the former intelligence analyst, had been quietly making secure calls to former colleagues still within the intelligence community. "I may have something," he told them, returning to the conference area. "There's a former assistant director named James Hargrove who retired 3 years ago. He ran the Eastern Europe division during your Berlin operation and reportedly had serious concerns about how your case was handled. He's been privately questioning the official narrative since Foster's death." Olivia recognized the name immediately. Hargrove had been one of the few senior officials who had pushed for thorough investigation of her Berlin discoveries before being overruled by higher authorities. His retirement had come suddenly amid rumors of disagreements with agency leadership over surveillance policies. "Can we trust him?" Moore asked. "My sources say he's been keeping detailed records of his concerns, including contemporaneous notes from the Berlin aftermath. He anticipated that someday the truth might need verification from someone with his credentials. If he's willing to go on record authenticating your identity and service, it would be difficult for them to maintain the foreign agent narrative." The decision to approach Hargrove carried significant risks. If he had been compromised or was under surveillance himself, contacting him could alert Project Helix to their location and intentions. But his testimony would provide precisely the independent verification they needed to establish Olivia's credibility. "I'll make the approach," Marcus offered. "I have secure channels from my previous work that might avoid detection and enough personal connection that he should at least hear me out." While Marcus worked to establish contact with Hargrove, the rest of the team continued processing the evidence, organizing it into a comprehensive narrative that would expose Project Helix's full scope while protecting sources and methods unrelated to the illegal surveillance. The Chronicle's legal team prepared for the inevitable government response to publication, drafting arguments against prior restraint and preparing for emergency court hearings. Their digital security experts strengthened protections around the publication systems, anticipating sophisticated attempts to prevent or disrupt the story's release. Olivia found herself in an unfamiliar role, not the covert operative or the hidden exile, but the central witness to government abuses preparing to speak publicly after years of enforced silence. It was a transition that required adjusting. Perspectives developed through years of classified work, where secrecy was reflexive and disclosure was threatening. "It's different on this side," Moore observed, noticing Olivia's contemplation as they reviewed documentation for the story. "In intelligence, you're trained to protect information at all costs. In journalism, our mission is to reveal it when the public interest demands transparency." "Both sides believe they're protecting democracy," Olivia replied. "The difference is in how we understand what threatens it. And what's your understanding now, after seeing both worlds?" Olivia considered the question carefully. "I believe in necessary secrets. operational details that protect lives and legitimate security interests. But systems of secrecy attract abuse precisely because they're shielded from accountability. When surveillance turns inward, targeting citizens who pose no threat beyond their capacity to question authority, secrecy no longer protects democracy, it undermines it. Moore nodded. That's the story we're telling. Not that all government surveillance is unjustified, but that Project Helix crossed fundamental lines, targeting Americans for their political beliefs, judicial decisions, or journalistic work. Exactly what the Constitution was designed to protect. Late that evening, Marcus returned with promising news. Hargrove had agreed to review their evidence and, if satisfied with its authenticity, provide sworn testimony confirming Olivia's identity and the legitimacy of her Berlin discoveries. He wants a secure meeting, verified evidence chain, and independent legal counsel present, Marcus explained. He's taking significant personal risk by coming forward, but he says he's been waiting for this moment since you disappeared in Berlin. The meeting was arranged for the following morning at a secure location. Hargrove suggested a private law office where he had established attorney-client privilege to protect sensitive discussions. Moore would attend with Olivia, while Marcus maintained surveillance outside to detect any indication the meeting had been compromised. Olivia spent the night reviewing case files and operation reports from the Berlin mission, refreshing her memory of details Hargrove might ask about to verify her identity. The exercise brought back vivid recollections of her final days as an active agent, the growing horror as she discovered American surveillance technology being deliberately provided to foreign entities, the realization that the program's true purpose was to launder domestic surveillance through international partners, and finally the recognition that powerful figures within her own government were willing to kill an American agent to protect their illegal operations. The law office Hargrove had selected projected understated professionalism, the kind of establishment that handled sensitive matters for clients who valued discretion above all else. The attorney present was a former Department of Justice official who had worked on national security cases before entering private practice, giving him both the security clearance and legal expertise to facilitate this extraordinary meeting. James Hargrove looked older than Olivia remembered, his once dark hair now completely gray. New lines etched around his eyes, but his bearing remained that of a senior intelligence official, alert and evaluative even in retirement. His initial expression upon seeing Olivia was one of contained shock, quickly replaced by focused intensity. "Agent Keller," he said, using her official designation rather than her undercover identity. "You look remarkably well for someone who's been dead for 8 years. Death has its advantages, Director Hargrove, particularly when powerful people want you silenced." The authentication process was thorough. Hargrove asked detailed questions about operations and briefings that only someone with Olivia's access and experience would know. He reviewed documentation from Foster's archives, confirming security markings and authorization signatures that would be nearly impossible to forge convincingly. Most significantly, he produced his own contemporaneous notes from the Berlin aftermath, handwritten records kept in a personal safe rather than agency systems, documenting his concerns about the official investigation and his unsuccessful attempts to pursue Olivia's discoveries about Project Helix. "I knew something wasn't right," Hargrove explained as they compared his records with Olivia's evidence. "The speed with which your death was certified, the immediate classification of your final communications, the way certain names were redacted even from my briefings. Foster and I discussed our concerns privately, but we were overruled at every turn by authorities claiming national security priorities." "Did you know I was alive?" Olivia asked. "Not with certainty," Hargrove admitted. "Foster never confirmed it directly. He was too careful for that. But he occasionally made comments that suggested contingency plans had been activated. When questions about Berlin started resurfacing recently, I suspected those plans might involve your eventual return. The former assistant director studied the Project Helix documentation with growing anger. This is worse than we feared. They've built an entire shadow system outside constitutional constraints. The domestic targeting has expanded exponentially since Berlin. Will you help us establish the truth? Moore asked directly. Hargrove's response was unhesitating. I'll provide sworn testimony confirming Agent Keller's identity, service record, and the authenticity of her Berlin discoveries. I'll also testify to the irregular handling of the investigation and the pressure applied to classify information that should have prompted criminal investigation. His commitment transformed their publication strategy. With a former assistant director publicly authenticating Olivia and the evidence, the foreign agent narrative would lose credibility. More importantly, Hargrove's testimony would provide legal protection for the Chronicle under First Amendment precedents regarding classified disclosures in the public interest. As they finalized arrangements for Hargrove's sworn statement, Olivia's secure communication device activated with an urgent message from Reeves. Surveillance detected at Chronicle offices. Digital intrusion attempts against Moore's systems. Your meeting location may be compromised. Evacuate immediately. The warning triggered well-rehearsed protocols. Moore contacted her team at the vault, initiating emergency backup procedures for their work product. The attorney escorted Hargrove through a private exit, taking him to a secondary location where his statement could be recorded securely. Olivia and Moore departed separately, using routes designed to detect and evade surveillance. They're accelerating their containment efforts, Olivia observed as they regrouped at a predetermined safe house 2 hours later. Someone identified our connection to the Chronicle sooner than anticipated. Moore's expression was grim but determined. We planned for this possibility. The evidence is secured in multiple locations. The story is prepped for emergency publication. And our technical team has activated decentralized publishing protocols that can't be easily blocked. Marcus arrived with additional intelligence from his contacts. Agency leadership called an emergency meeting an hour ago. Someone accessed internal systems using Foster's credentials, which triggered security alerts. They're trying to determine what was accessed and by whom. This suggested their time frame was even more compressed than expected. Project Helix's administrators now knew that Foster had maintained access to classified systems even after his death, likely through credentials he had established before the Berlin operation as insurance against exactly this scenario. We need to publish now, Moore decided. Hargrove's testimony is being finalized as we speak. Once Project Helix realizes he's involved, they'll move against him next. We can't risk losing our primary authenticating witness. The next 6 hours witnessed an extraordinary mobilization of journalistic resources. Moore's team executed their emergency publication, PROTOCOL, transmitting encrypted story packages to trusted partners at international news organizations, preparing simultaneous publication across multiple platforms to prevent effective suppression, and establishing secure channels for official responses once the story broke. Legal counsel prepared for immediate court challenges, including the likely attempt to secure prior restraint orders preventing publication. Digital security experts monitored for attacks against their publication infrastructure, ready to activate backup systems if primary channels were compromised. Throughout this intense preparation, Olivia worked with the data team to ensure the evidence was presented accurately and effectively. The story would name senior officials who had authorized Project Helix, detail the system's capabilities and targets, document specific instances where surveillance had been weaponized against American citizens, and reveal the elaborate cover-up that had included staging her death in Berlin. Hargrove's sworn statement arrived through secure channels, 15 pages of detailed testimony establishing Olivia's identity, confirming the authenticity of her evidence, and documenting his own attempts to investigate Project Helix before being blocked by higher authorities. His credibility as a former assistant director combined with his contemporaneous records, created a foundation of verification that would be difficult for Project Helix's defenders to undermine. As final preparations were completed, Moore gathered her team for a moment of reflection before publication. What we're about to do will change the conversation about government surveillance permanently. There will be significant pushback. Legal, professional, and perhaps personal. But this story represents journalism's essential purpose, holding power accountable when other mechanisms have failed. She turned to Olivia. Agent Keller sacrificed her career and identity 8 years ago trying to address this through proper channels. When those channels proved corrupted, she chose the difficult path of exile rather than compromise. Now she's risking everything again to ensure the truth reaches the public. Our commitment to this story honors that courage. The publication sequence began at precisely midnight, a coordinated release across the Chronicle's platforms, simultaneous publication by international partners, and distribution to key congressional offices and regulatory agencies. The headline was stark in its simplicity: Project Helix, Inside America's Secret Domestic Surveillance Program. The story began with Olivia's testimony. My name is Olivia Keller. For the past 8 years, I have been officially listed as missing in action, presumed dead following a covert operation in Berlin. That classification was deliberately falsified to conceal what I discovered, a classified program called Project Helix that has been illegally monitoring American citizens, including federal judges, journalists, attorneys, and elected officials. What followed was the most comprehensive exposure of government surveillance overreach since the Pentagon Papers. Thousands of pages of classified documents, testimony from senior officials, technical specifications revealing capabilities far beyond what had been publicly acknowledged, and evidence of active manipulation against Americans targeted for their political activities or professional responsibilities. Most damning were the target lists revealing that Project Helix had specifically focused on individuals who might challenge expanded surveillance powers, constitutional scholars whose legal theories could undermine surveillance authorities, judges who had questioned government evidence in terrorism cases, journalists who had published previous exposes of intelligence overreach, and legislators who had proposed stronger oversight mechanisms. The publication triggered immediate reaction across government institutions. The White House issued a brief statement acknowledging the allegations and promising thorough investigation. Key congressional leaders announced emergency hearings to examine the evidence. The Justice Department faced questions about potential criminal liability for officials who had authorized domestic surveillance without proper warrants or oversight. Project Helix's administrators attempted to implement their planned counter-narrative, issuing statements questioning Olivia's credibility and suggesting the documents were sophisticated forgeries. But Hargrove's testimony, combined with the sheer volume and specificity of the evidence, made these denials ring hollow even to normally deferential security journalists. By dawn, the story had become a seismic event in American governance, a fundamental challenge to secret systems that had operated beyond constitutional constraints for nearly a decade. News networks canceled regular programming for continuous coverage. Constitutional experts debated the implications for separation of powers, and civil liberties organizations announced immediate legal action on behalf of individuals targeted by the program. For Olivia, watching from the secure facility as her evidence reached the public after 8 years of enforced silence, the moment brought complex emotions. There was vindication in seeing her discoveries finally acknowledged, relief that the truth about Berlin was now established, and hope that systems of accountability might finally address the abuses she had uncovered. But there was also awareness that her life had been irreversibly altered, again. Morgan Reed would never return to her quiet existence in Colorado. Olivia Keller could never resume the career that had been interrupted in Berlin. Whatever came next would require yet another reinvention, another identity crafted from the remnants of previous lives, What will you do now?" Moore asked as they monitored the unfolding response to the publication. "First, survive the aftermath," Olivia replied practically. "Project Helix may be exposed, but its architects still hold significant power. They won't simply surrender because of headlines. And after that, when the hearings are concluded and the legal battle's settled?" Olivia considered the question that had haunted her exile, who she might become when the mission was finally complete. "I don't know yet. For 8 years, keeping this evidence secure defined my existence. I'm not sure who I am without that purpose." Moore nodded understanding. "Foster once told me that the hardest challenge for deep cover operatives isn't maintaining their cover, it's remembering who they really are beneath the identities they assume. He believed you had that strength, even when you might have forgotten it yourself." As the morning progressed, bringing new developments with each passing hour, Olivia reflected on Foster's confidence, not just in her operational capabilities, but in her essential character. "The most difficult decision I faced in Berlin wasn't discovering illegal surveillance," she told the committee, her voice steady as cameras broadcast her words nationwide. "It was recognizing that the institutions I had served faithfully were being corrupted from within, and that addressing that corruption might require stepping outside those institutions' established procedures." She described the isolation of that moment, realizing that reporting through normal channels would likely result in evidence suppression rather than investigation, understanding that powerful figures would prioritize program protection over constitutional adherence, recognizing that her own career and possibly her life would be sacrificed to maintain systems operating beyond democratic accountability. "What sustained me through 8 years of exile wasn't bitterness or vindication, but a fundamental belief that the principles underlying our constitutional system remained worth defending, even when the institutions designed to embody those principles temporarily failed. I believe that democratic governance, however imperfect in execution, contained within it the capacity for self-correction if citizens and officials of conscience created space for truth to emerge." Her testimony shifted national conversation from technical surveillance capabilities to the ethical responsibilities of individuals within powerful systems, the necessity of moral courage when institutional processes are corrupted, the obligation of personal conscience when organizational imperatives conflict with constitutional principles. This perspective resonated across political divisions, offering common ground between traditional institutional defenders and advocates for radical transparency. It acknowledged both the necessity of legitimate government secrets and the essential requirement that secrecy serve democratic governance rather than undermining it. As reforms progressed and accountability mechanisms strengthened, Olivia began rebuilding her life with newfound freedom. The official resurrection of Olivia Keller after 8 years listed as missing in action created practical and emotional challenges, but also opportunities for integration rather than compartmentalization of her experiences. She established a foundation focused on government accountability and whistleblower protection, providing legal support and security resources for individuals navigating the complex ethical terrain she had experienced firsthand. Her unique perspective, understanding both legitimate national security requirements and the danger of their overextension, brought credibility with institutional defenders and reform advocates alike. The security footage that had triggered her emergence from exile became a powerful symbol in political discourse, visual evidence that truth, however thoroughly buried, retained the capacity to resurface when conscience demanded its recognition. The image of Olivia leaving the Berlin warehouse minutes before the explosion that officially claimed her life appeared in university textbooks examining the evolution of democratic accountability in the digital age. 6 months after the Chronicle's initial publication, with Project Helix dismantled and its architects facing justice, Olivia visited Catherine Moore at her office overlooking the Capitol. Comprehensive surveillance reform legislation was moving toward final passage, incorporating protections that would have prevented the abuses Olivia had discovered in Berlin 8 years earlier. "Do you think it will work?" Moore asked, gesturing toward the Capitol where the reforms were being finalized. "These new oversight mechanisms, the enhanced whistleblower protections, the technological safeguards? They're necessary but insufficient," Olivia replied, her perspective tempered by experience rather than cynicism. "Technical reforms create better frameworks for accountability, but ultimately democracy depends on people of conscience making difficult choices when those frameworks fail. No system can eliminate the need for moral courage." This understanding, that democratic governance required both robust institutional protections and individuals willing to defend constitutional principles when those protections faltered, represented the most profound lesson of her extraordinary journey. The security footage that revealed she had never died in Berlin had triggered a national reckoning with surveillance overreach, but the true protection against future abuse lay in citizens and officials committed to constitutional governance, even when powerful interests demanded their silence. As evening fell over Washington, Olivia stood at the Lincoln Memorial, contemplating the words inscribed there, "Government of the people, by the people, for the people," and reflected on her own role in ensuring those words retained meaning in an age of unprecedented technological power. Her journey from intelligence operative to exile to public advocate had been marked by loss and sacrifice, but also by the profound satisfaction of defending principles that transcended any single institution or administration. The woman who had been listed as missing in action for 8 years had returned not just to reclaim her identity, but to strengthen the democratic principles that made that identity meaningful. In doing so, she had transformed personal vindication into institutional renewal, ensuring that the truth revealed by security footage became not just an exposure of past wrongs, but a foundation for a more accountable future. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from U.S.